By the following morning, the Kerrigan case had exploded across local and national media. Headlines proclaimed variations of Nazi loot found in prominent NI family's secret tunnels and Murder and Stolen Art, the Kerrigan family scandal. The discovery of a hidden collection of Holocaust-looted valuables connected to a young woman's murder had created a perfect storm of sensational news. Claire and Sean awakened to find 3 news vans parked on Sleve Donard Avenue, journalists clearly hoping to catch sight of their neighbors or anyone connected to the investigation. Their own involvement had apparently not yet been discovered by the press, a small mercy for which Claire was grateful. "Inspector Nolan called while you were in the shower," Sean informed her as they prepared breakfast. Margaret Byrne was questioned extensively last night but released without charges. Her security footage is being analyzed by technical specialists. "Did he say what it showed?" Claire asked. "Not specifically, but he implied it captured something significant," Sean replied. "He's asked if we can meet him at the station this morning to review some findings." Claire nodded, her curiosity piqued despite her growing desire to distance themselves from the Kerrigan drama. "Any update on the family?" Margaret Sr. has issued a formal statement through her solicitor acknowledging the discovery of looted art and committing to full restitution to original owners or their descendants. Catherine and Robert are reportedly cooperating with the investigation, and Fiona has returned to Paris with police permission, though she's required to remain available for further questioning. "So no arrests yet," Claire observed, despite all the evidence connecting Ava's murder to the pendant and the family's secrets. "Apparently not," Sean confirmed, though Nolan's request to meet suggests they might be getting closer to making their case. They managed to slip past the journalists by exiting through their back garden gate and taking a circuitous route to the Newcastle police station. The building itself was surrounded by media, but an officer met them at a side entrance, ushering them quickly inside to avoid public attention. Inspector Nolan greeted them in a conference room where multiple evidence boards displayed photographs, timelines, and documentation related to the case. Claire noted images of the pendant, the hidden chambers, and Ava's purple notebook prominently featured in the displays. "Thank you for coming," Nolan said, gesturing for them to sit. "I appreciate your continued assistance with this investigation." "Have there been new developments?" Sean asked directly. Nolan nodded, his expression suggesting significant progress. "Several, in fact. The technical team has enhanced the security footage from Mrs. Byrne's cottage, and we've completed our analysis of the financial records found in the hidden safe beneath Thornfield." "And?" Claire prompted when he paused. "The footage clearly shows someone approaching the harbor wall at approximately 4:52 a.m. the morning after Ava's death," Nolan explained, moving to a laptop set up on the conference table. "Watch carefully." He played a grainy black and white video showing the harbor area in pre-dawn darkness. A figure walked purposefully along the wall, paused near the edge, and made a distinct throwing motion before quickly departing. The entire sequence lasted less than a minute, and the figure's face remained obscured by what appeared to be a hooded coat. "Can you identify who it is?" Claire asked, studying the indistinct figure. "Not definitively from this footage alone," Nolan admitted. "The resolution isn't sufficient for facial recognition, and the subject is clearly attempting to conceal their identity with appropriate clothing." "But you have other evidence," Sean suggested, reading between the lines. "Yes," Nolan confirmed. "When enhanced and analyzed alongside other data points, we can establish several key facts. The subject is approximately 5'10" tall, based on gait analysis, likely female, and most significantly, they approached the harbor from the direction of Thornfield Hall, not from the town center." Claire processed these details. "You're suggesting it was someone from the Kerrigan household?" "The evidence points in that direction," Nolan agreed. "And when combined with the financial records from the hidden safe, we've developed a working theory of what happened the night Ava died." He moved to the evidence boards, indicating the financial documentation. James Kerrigan maintained detailed records of all payments related to family secrets, both his anonymous restitution efforts and what can only be described as blackmail payments to multiple individuals over decades, including Margaret Byrne, Claire noted, remembering Sean's revelation from the previous day. Yes, though her payments were actually among the smallest, Nolan continued. The largest and most consistent payments went to someone identified only as FC in the records, nearly £2 million over 15 years, with the most recent payment just 2 months before Ava's death. FC, Sean repeated. Fiona Kerrigan? That's our conclusion, Nolan confirmed. Based on bank records we've obtained through court order, the payments were directed to accounts in Paris linked to Fiona, though carefully obscured through various shell companies and art gallery businesses. Claire tried to reconcile this information with what they knew about Fiona, the seemingly principled daughter who had claimed to be carrying on her father's documentation work. You're suggesting Fiona was blackmailing her own father? About what? That's where Ava's notebook proved invaluable, Nolan explained. Her later entries suggest she discovered these payment records while working with Fiona in the hidden chambers. When she questioned the disbursements, Fiona apparently told her they were funding the restitution project, researching original owners, legal consultations, etc. But Ava didn't believe her, Sean guessed. She began investigating independently, Nolan confirmed. And what she discovered was far more complex than simple blackmail. According to her notes, Fiona had known about the looted art collection since her early 20s, long before James allegedly revealed it to her. In fact, evidence suggests she discovered it accidentally while exploring Thornfield as a young woman, and used that knowledge to blackmail her father, Claire concluded. Initially, yes, but over time, their arrangement evolved into something more like a partnership, Nolan continued. James provided significant financial support for Fiona's life in Paris, her gallery, her apartment, her artistic pursuits, in exchange for her discretion about the collection, and eventually, her assistance in documenting it for potential future restitution. So when Fiona told us she was continuing her father's documentation work, Claire began, she was telling a partial truth, Nolan finished. She was indeed documenting the collection, but had been doing so for much longer than she admitted, and under very different circumstances than she portrayed. But this doesn't explain why she would kill Ava, Sean pointed out. If they were working together on cataloging the collection, if Ava was helping with the documentation project. That's where the pendant comes in, Nolan said, moving to that section of the evidence board. Ava's later notebook entries suggest she had begun to question inconsistencies in the family narratives about both the collection and the pendant itself. She visited Margaret Byrne, learned about the pendant's connection to a 1913 theft, and somehow discovered its function as a key to the safe deposit box containing James's documentation about the family's Nazi connections, Claire recalled. Precisely. And according to the final entries in her notebook, entries Fiona apparently didn't know existed, Ava had determined the pendant would provide proof of something she called the original crime and the source of all Kerrigan corruption. But we already know about the looted art and the pendant's stolen origins, Sean said, frowning. What more was there to discover? Nolan's expression turned grave. That's the final piece of the puzzle, and the one Ava apparently confronted Fiona with the night she died. Dr. Murphy, you asked earlier why Fiona would kill someone who was helping her document the collection. The answer appears to be that Ava discovered Fiona wasn't planning restitution at all. What? Claire asked, surprised. But the documentation work, the photographs, the research on original owners, all genuine, Nolan confirmed. But according to financial records and email correspondence recovered from the hidden safe, Fiona wasn't documenting the collection for restitution. She was preparing it for private sale to a network of unscrupulous collectors who acquire problematic items with no questions asked. The revelation landed with stunning force. Fiona Kerrigan, who had presented herself as continuing her father's ethical project, had actually been preparing to sell the looted items for personal profit, betraying both her father's intentions and the original owners whose possessions had been stolen during the Holocaust. And Ava discovered this, Claire said, the pieces finally aligning in her mind. That's why Fiona killed her, not to protect old family secrets, but to prevent exposure of her current criminal scheme. The evidence points strongly in that direction, Nolan agreed. Ava's final notebook entry, dated the day she died, indicates she planned to confront Fiona with what she discovered. Phone records show she called Fiona that evening and spoke for nearly 7 minutes. After which Fiona presumably went to Ava's apartment, Sean continued the theory. Yes, CCTV from the Harbor Apartments shows Fiona entering at approximately 11:30 p.m. and leaving again at 2:17 a.m., well within the timeline for Ava's death established by the medical examiner. But why take the pendant? Claire asked, still trying to understand all the connections. And why throw it into the harbor? We believe Ava had taken the pendant from Margaret Sr.'s jewelry box earlier that day, Nolan explained. Her notebook mentions plans to access the safe deposit box and obtain James's documentation about the collection's origins, presumably to stop Fiona's plan to sell the items. And Fiona took it from Ava after killing her, Sean concluded. Yes, but initially didn't know what to do with it, Nolan continued. According to her initial statement, which we now know to be false, Fiona claimed to have been in Paris the night Ava died. In reality, she returned to Thornfield after leaving Ava's apartment, apparently to replace the pendant before its absence was discovered. But Margaret found it missing first thing in the morning, Claire recalled, before Fiona could return it. Exactly. Panic ensued, the police were called, and Fiona realized she needed to dispose of the pendant quickly before it could be connected to her through forensic evidence. Nolan gestured to the security footage still frozen on the laptop screen, hence the pre-dawn visit to Newcastle Harbor. The entire sequence now made terrible sense, Ava discovering Fiona's true plans for the looted collection, confronting her, being killed to prevent exposure, and the pendant being disposed of to eliminate evidence linking Fiona to both the theft and the murder. "Have you arrested Fiona?" Sean asked, the logical next step given the evidence Nolan had presented. "We're in the process of coordinating with French authorities," Nolan replied. "She returned to Paris yesterday with our permission, before we had fully analyzed the security footage and financial records. We're confident she'll be in custody within hours." Claire felt a complex mixture of emotions. Satisfaction that Ava's killer would face justice, sadness for the Kerrigan family facing yet another devastating blow, and lingering questions about aspects of the case. "What about Margaret Byrne's role in all this?" she asked. The payments from James, her conversations with Ava, her security footage that proved crucial to identifying Fiona. Mrs. Byrne has provided a revised statement acknowledging the full extent of her financial arrangement with James Kerrigan, Nolan explained. It appears she was indeed blackmailing him about the pendant's origins, but had no knowledge of the larger looted art collection or Fiona's plans to sell it. "And you believe her?" Sean asked skeptically. "Her account aligns with the evidence we've recovered," Nolan replied diplomatically. "And she has cooperated fully since providing the security footage, which proved instrumental in solving the case." Claire wasn't entirely convinced, but decided not to press the point. Margaret Byrne had demonstrated remarkable skill at revealing exactly what she wanted known, while concealing her deeper involvement in Newcastle's complex social dynamics. "What will happen to the collection?" Claire asked instead. "The looted art and valuables?" "An international team of restitution experts has been assembled," Nolan explained. "They'll be working to identify original owners or their descendants and facilitate returns where possible. The Kerrigan family, primarily Margaret Sr., has committed to full cooperation and financial support for the process." "And the pendant itself?" Sean inquired. "Being properly documented and researched by art crime specialists," Nolan said. "Preliminary findings confirm it was indeed stolen in the 1913 London heist, then later acquired through Nazi seizures from a Jewish family in Vienna, exactly as James Kerrigan documented in his records." "Will it be returned to descendants of the original owners?" Claire asked, her professional interest in art provenance engaged despite the tragic circumstances. "Eventually, yes, though the process may be complicated by competing claims," Nolan acknowledged. "For now, it remains in secure evidence storage, its remarkable journey from 1913 London to Newcastle Harbor finally documented for historical records." As their meeting with Nolan concluded, Claire felt a sense of closure beginning to form around the Kerrigan case. The mystery of the missing heirloom had been solved, Ava's killer identified, and the process of reckoning with the family's dark past initiated. Yet questions lingered about the wider implications. How many other prestigious families in Mourne Heights and beyond had built their fortunes on similarly problematic foundations? How many other precious objects displayed in elegant homes carried hidden histories of theft and tragedy? These were questions for another day, perhaps. For now, the immediate mystery had been resolved, though at terrible cost to the Kerrigan family, and most especially to Ava, whose search for truth had cost her life but ultimately exposed generations of deception. As they left the police station, carefully avoiding the media gathered outside, Claire turned to Sean. "Do you think Margaret Kerrigan knew about Fiona's plans to sell the collection instead of returning it?" Sean considered the question thoughtfully. "I don't think so. Whatever her faults, Margaret seemed genuinely committed to addressing the family's moral debts once she learned of them. Finding out her daughter planned to profit from Holocaust victims' stolen property would be antithetical to everything she values." "She's lost so much," Claire observed sadly. "Her granddaughter murdered, her husband's lifetime of deception exposed, and now her daughter revealed as both a killer and would-be trafficker in looted art." "The Kerrigan legacy is irrevocably altered," Sean agreed, "but perhaps that's necessary. Truth, however painful, allows for genuine atonement in a way that concealment never could." As they drove home, navigating carefully past the media encampment that had formed near their neighborhood, Claire's thoughts returned to Margaret Byrne. Their enigmatic neighbor had once again played a crucial role in exposing a prominent family's secrets, just as she had with the McKeevers months earlier. Was it coincidence that both scandals had unfolded in such proximity to her cottage? Or was Margaret Byrne more actively involved in orchestrating these revelations than she appeared? These questions would have to wait for another day. For now, the immediate drama had concluded, the missing heirloom found, its secrets revealed, and justice for Ava Kerrigan set in motion. The sapphire pendant had indeed proven to be the key to everything, unlocking not just a safe deposit box, but generations of deception that had finally, tragically, culminated in murder. 1 month later, Claire stood in the newly established restitution center at the Newcastle Museum, watching as specialists carefully photographed and documented a small oil painting attributed to Egon Schiele. The painting, depicting a riverside scene in Vienna, had been among the items recovered from the hidden chambers beneath Thornfield Hall, one of dozens now being systematically processed for return to the descendants of their rightful owners. "Beautiful, isn't it?" a voice observed beside her. Claire turned to find Margaret Kerrigan standing there, elegant as ever in simple black attire that suggested continuing mourning. In the weeks since the revelations about Fiona, Margaret had aged visibly, new lines etched around her eyes and mouth, her posture slightly less commanding than before. Yet she maintained a dignity that Claire couldn't help but admire, given the circumstances. "Yes," Claire agreed, turning back to the painting. "And back where it can be seen and appreciated, instead of hidden away in darkness." A fitting metaphor, Margaret noted with the hint of a sad smile. For art, for truth, for many things. The Restitution Center had been established with significant funding from the Kerrigan Foundation, transformed from charitable trust to reparations vehicle in the wake of the scandal. Margaret had taken personal charge of the process, working directly with international experts to ensure each item was properly documented, researched, and prepared for return to descendants of the original owners where possible. "How are the preparations coming along?" Claire asked, gesturing to the various workstations where conservators and provenance researchers collaborated. "Better than expected," Margaret replied. Many of these items were well documented before the war, making the restitution process more straightforward than we initially feared. "We've already identified descendants for nearly 40% of the collection." "That's remarkable progress," Claire said sincerely. "It helps that James maintained such meticulous records," Margaret acknowledged. "For all his faults, and there were many, he did try to lay the groundwork for eventual restitution, even if he couldn't bring himself to initiate it during his lifetime." They watched in companionable silence as the specialists continued their work, the painting carefully measured, photographed, and examined for conservation needs before its eventual return to the descendants of the Rosen family of Vienna, from whom it had been seized in 1938. "Have you heard from Fiona?" Claire asked carefully, unsure if Margaret would want to discuss her daughter's situation. A shadow crossed Margaret's face. "Her trial begins next month in Paris. The French authorities have been thorough in their investigation of her gallery operations. It appears the Kerrigan collection wasn't the only problematic art she was planning to move through her network." "I'm sorry," Claire said, meaning it despite everything. "As am I," Margaret replied simply, "though perhaps not for the reasons you might imagine. I'm sorry Fiona chose this path, sorry for the additional harm she planned to inflict on families who had already suffered unimaginably, and most of all, sorry for Ava, who died trying to prevent further wrong." The mention of Ava brought a sudden, tangible grief to Margaret's expression. Unlike Fiona, whose betrayal had been shock layered upon shock, Ava's loss remained a simple, devastating absence, a bright light extinguished before its time. "The scholarship program is a fitting tribute," Claire said gently, referencing the Ava Kerrigan Memorial Scholarship, recently established to support students studying Holocaust history and art restitution. "It's what she would have wanted," Margaret agreed, "to contribute meaningfully to making things right. In her final days, she found purpose in that work, a purpose Fiona perverted for profit, but which Ava embraced sincerely." As they continued their tour of the restitution center, Margaret pointed out various items being processed: silver menorahs, rare books, jewelry, and paintings, each with its own story of ownership, theft, and now, hopefully, return. "And the pendant?" Claire asked eventually, the question that had brought them all into this tangled web of secrets and lies. "Currently in London with specialized researchers," Margaret explained. "Its journey was particularly complex, stolen from one family in 1913, acquired by another during the 1930s, then seized by Nazi officials, acquired by Archibald, and eventually passed to me. Multiple legitimate claims are being evaluated by an independent panel. Will you contest their decision?" Claire asked, curious about Margaret's perspective now that she understood the pendant's true origins. "No," Margaret said firmly. "I wore that pendant for decades, believing it to be a symbol of Kerrigan family continuity and tradition. Now I understand it was actually a symbol of something very different, of theft, exploitation, and generational deception. I have no desire to maintain any claim to it." They paused before a glass display case containing photographs of items already returned to descendants, a visible record of the restitution process underway. Each photograph was accompanied by statements from receiving families, many expressing profound emotion at reconnecting with possessions they had believed lost forever. "This is how we rebuild," Margaret said quietly, "not by concealing uncomfortable truths or maintaining fictional narratives about our past, but by acknowledging wrongs and taking concrete steps to address them. Too late for many, but still necessary." "It takes courage," Claire observed, "to face such difficult truths about one's family history." "Less courage than continuing to live with deception," Margaret countered. "I spent decades in a beautiful house built on a foundation of lies. The truth, however painful, is more sustainable." As they concluded their tour and prepared to part ways, Margaret turned to Claire with unexpected directness. "I never properly thanked you and Sean for your involvement in all of this. Your outside perspective helped break through generations of family obfuscation." "We simply followed the evidence as it emerged," Claire demurred. "Inspector Nolan did the real investigative work." "Nevertheless," Margaret insisted, "your willingness to question established narratives, to look beneath the surface of Mourne Heights' respectability, proved crucial. Not everyone would have pursued the truth so persistently." The compliment was genuine, but Claire detected something else in Margaret's tone, perhaps a subtle warning about the costs of such persistent truth-seeking. After all, Claire and Sean had now been involved in exposing two of Newcastle's most prominent families, with significant social and personal repercussions. "Truth has its own imperative," Claire replied simply. "Once glimpsed, it's difficult to look away." Margaret nodded, a flash of something like recognition crossing her features. Indeed, though in Mourne Heights, many have perfected the art of selective blindness, it's a skill I myself practiced for decades. As they parted at the museum entrance, Margaret paused for a final observation. You know, the Wilsons have invited you to their anniversary gala next month. I understand Edward has been making some interesting financial moves recently, transferring assets, adjusting ownership records. The comment, delivered with careful casualness that belied its implications, caught Claire by surprise. Are you suggesting? I'm not suggesting anything, Margaret replied with diplomatic precision, merely noting that beneath Mourne Heights' perfect surface, currents continue to move. Whether one chooses to notice them is, of course, entirely personal. With that cryptic observation, Margaret Kerrigan departed, her dignified silhouette framed momentarily against the museum's grand entrance before she disappeared into her waiting car. Claire remained for a moment, considering Margaret's parting words and their implications. Edward Wilson's financial maneuvers, another prestigious family in Mourne Heights, more secrets potentially waiting beneath a carefully maintained surface. For today, however, she would focus on the resolution at hand, the systematic processing of looted art, the careful documentation of provenance, the gradual restoration of items to their rightful owners. One family's secrets had been exposed, one missing heirloom returned to its complex historical context, one killer brought to justice. As for what other secrets might lie beneath Mourne Heights' perfect surface, those revelations, if they came, would be for another day. The end.